Welcome back to Talk Tickers, ready for another deep dive.
Always. What are we dissecting today?
Today, we're taking a close look at AbbVie's latest earnings call. It was for Q4 2024.
Sounds good. You know those pharma giants always have something interesting going on.
Absolutely. So let's get right into it. What were the headline numbers? How did AbbVie actually perform?
Well, in short, they crushed it.
Crushed it. Okay, give me the details.
Adjusted earnings per share came in at $10.12 for the year, and their total revenue, a massive $56.3 billion.
Wow, that's significantly higher than what a lot of analysts were expecting, right?
You're right. It definitely exceeded expectations. And remember, this is all happening after they lost exclusivity on Humira.
Yeah, the Humira patent cliff.
Oh.
Everyone was wondering how they'd manage that.
Right. It was a big question mark for them. Humira was such a huge revenue driver.
So how did they manage to not just stay afloat, but actually exceed expectations? What's their secret?
Well, it really comes down to their long-term strategy. They've been diversifying their portfolio beyond Humira for years, investing heavily in developing new therapies.
So they had a plan in place. They knew this was coming, and they weren't caught off guard.
Exactly. They were prepared. And now those investments are starting to pay off in a big way.
Okay, so let's talk about those investments. What are the shining stars in this diversified portfolio? What's driving their growth?
The real standouts are Skyrizi and Rinvoq. These two immunology drugs are absolutely crushing it.
Okay, I've heard those names, but I need a refresher. What exactly do Skyrizi and Rinvoq treat?
They're both used to treat a whole range of autoimmune conditions. Think psoriasis, Crohn's disease, rheumatoid arthritis.
So they're targeting some pretty widespread conditions. That means a large potential patient population.
Exactly. And that's a big part of why these drugs are bringing in so much revenue.
How much revenue are we talking about here?
Just in 2024 alone, Skyrizi and Rinvoq brought in a combined $17.7 billion.
Seriously, that's a lot of money. How does that compare to the previous year?
It's a massive jump. It's almost $6 billion more than what they brought in the year before.
Okay, so these drugs are clearly doing well. But what's the reason for this incredible success? Is it just that they treat common conditions?
That's part of it, but there's more to it than that. These drugs are proving incredibly effective. They're becoming the preferred treatment options for both doctors and patients.
So it's not just about market size. It's about being the best in the market.
Exactly. And that's allowing AbbVie to capture a significant chunk of the market share.
They're not just treating common conditions. They're becoming the go-to choice, which is fantastic for future growth too, right?
You got it. They're actually projecting that combined sales for these two drugs will reach over $31 billion by 2027.
Wow. So they're really banking on these drugs to continue their success.
They are. They're confident in the long-term potential of Skyrizi and Rinvoq.
Okay, so immunology is clearly a big focus for AbbVie, but they're not a one-trick pony, right?
Yeah.
What other areas are they making waves in?
You're right. They've got their fingers in a lot of pies. They're making significant progress in neuroscience, oncology, and even aesthetics.
It's like they're building a healthcare empire. Let's start with neuroscience. What are they doing in that space?
Their neuroscience portfolio is projected to hit $10 billion in sales by 2025. That's a pretty impressive jump.
It is. What's driving that growth? What specific conditions are they targeting?
They have treatments for a whole range of conditions in that area. Psychiatry, migraine, and Parkinson's disease being some of the key ones.
Those are some major areas of unmet medical need. It sounds like they're really trying to make a difference in people's lives.
Absolutely. They've got a new Parkinson's treatment called Vyalev that just launched, and they're also in late-stage trials for another drug called tavapadon.
Tavapadon. That name rings a bell. I think I read something about that. It's showing some really promising results, right?
It is. They're pretty excited about the potential of that drug. It could be a game changer for Parkinson's patients.
Okay, so they're making some serious moves in neuroscience. What about oncology? That's always a hotbed for innovation and, unfortunately, a growing market.
Absolutely. It's a tough market, but AbbVie is holding their own. Their blockbuster drug. Imbruvica is facing some competition.
Right. I remember reading about that. It's been a big earner for them, but competition is heating up.
Yeah, that's the nature of the pharmaceutical industry. But the good news is that they have other oncology treatments that are picking up the slack.
Like what? Give me some names.
Venclexta and Elahere are both performing well, and they have two really interesting next-generation therapies in their pipeline.
Oh, next-generation therapies. Sounds intriguing. What are they working on?
They're called Telisotro and Tumabe. They're c-Met ADCs.
c-Met ADCs. Okay, I'm going to need you to break that down for me. What are those?
Think of them as a super targeted cancer therapy. It's like a guided missile that delivers potent drugs directly to cancer cells.
So they minimize the damage to healthy tissue. That's amazing.
Exactly. That's the whole idea behind it. They're still in development, but the early data is very promising.
Wow, that's really exciting. I'm definitely going to have to do some more research on those. Okay, so we've covered immunology, neuroscience, oncology. Now for something completely different. Aesthetics. What's a pharmaceutical giant like AbbVie doing dabbling in beauty?
Well, a few years back, they acquired Allergan.
Allergan, the Botox people.
That's the one. That acquisition gave them a big footprint in the aesthetics market with brands like Botox and Juvederm.
So they're not just treating diseases, they're also helping people look and feel their best.
Exactly. It's all part of their diversified approach.
Makes sense. But I have to ask, how's that part of their business doing? It seems like the economy has been a bit shaky lately. People might be cutting back on things like Botox, right?
You're right. There have been some economic headwinds lately. They've seen some softness in the US and China especially.
Yeah, those are two big markets for them.
Absolutely. But they're still optimistic about the long-term prospects of the aesthetics market.
So are they basically banking on people wanting to look and feel their best as the world moves past the pandemic and economic uncertainties?
They believe there's still a lot of untapped potential in the market.
Okay, fair enough. So they've got a diverse portfolio, they're performing well, they're making big bets on the future. But with all this growth, there must be some challenges on the horizon. What are some potential roadblocks they've acknowledged?
Well, one thing they highlighted is the Medicare Part D redesign.
Oh, yeah, I've been hearing about that. But to be honest, I'm not exactly sure what it is or how it'll impact companies like AbbVie.
So basically, it changes how drug costs are shared.
Yeah.
It could potentially impact patient access to some medications.
So some people might have a harder time affording their medications. That's a real concern, especially with life-saving treatments.
It is. It's something they're watching closely. But they're also expecting to see an increase in volume from patients who will now have lower out-of-pocket costs.
So there's a potential upside as well. More people might be able to afford their medications now.
That's the hope.
Yeah.
They believe that will at least partially offset any negative impact from the changes.
Fingers crossed. But you know, AbbVie, they always seem to have a backup plan, a way to navigate these tricky situations. They've got a reputation for being pretty savvy, don't they?
They do. And they're not afraid to make bold moves.
Like their history of acquisitions. They've made some pretty big splashes in the past.
Definitely Skyrizi, Rinvoq, Allergan. Those were all major acquisitions.
And they've all paid off for them. So what's their strategy for future acquisition? What are they looking for?
They're laser focused on those core growth areas we discussed. Immunology, oncology, and neuroscience. They're looking for companies that will strengthen their position in those markets.
So they're not just randomly buying companies, they have a clear strategy.
Exactly. They've actually already closed over 20 early-stage deals since the beginning of 2024.
Wow, 20 deals. They're not messing around. What kind of companies are they targeting? Startups? Smaller biotech firms?
They're looking for companies with innovative therapies, things that have the potential to be the next big thing in those fields.
So they're betting on the future. They're not just trying to maintain their current position. They're trying to dominate these markets.
Exactly. They're playing the long game, and with their track record and resources, they've got a good shot at winning.
It's impressive to see a company this big still so hungry for growth and innovation.
They're definitely a company to keep an eye on. They've got big ambitions, and they're not afraid to take risks to achieve them.
All right, so we've got this huge company making big moves, taking on new challenges, and investing in the future. But what about the here and now? What stood out to you about their financial performance in this specific quarter?
I mean, their revenue growth, despite the Humira patent cliff, is just phenomenal. We're talking billions of dollars in lost revenue from just one drug.
And yet they're thriving.
That's the power of a well-executed diversification plan, right? They anticipated this was coming and made moves to offset it.
Smart move. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. What were some of the key things they invested in?
Well, like we talked about, they doubled down on areas with unmet medical needs: immunology, oncology, neuroscience. They're becoming leaders in the spaces where new treatments are desperately needed.
Which means they can command higher prices, right?
Right. Their treatments are often cutting edge and highly effective. They're not just competing on price, they're competing on the value they bring to patients.
And they're clearly winning in that regard, especially with Skyrizi and Rinvoq. Those drugs aren't cheap, but people are willing to pay for them because they work so well.
Exactly. And that's not just because of the science behind them. AbbVie has a phenomenal sales and marketing team.
Oh, they're good. I know a few people who work there, and they say the company invests heavily in making sure their sales force is top-notch.
It's essential in this industry. They need to build trust with doctors and effectively communicate the benefits of their treatments.
Clearly, it's working. But you mentioned some potential headwinds earlier, the Medicare Part D redesign and a shaky economic climate. How much of an impact do you think those will have in the coming year?
The Medicare thing is a bit of a wild card. They expect more prescriptions to be filled because some patients will have lower out-of-pocket costs, but it's hard to say how behavior will change on a large scale.
Yeah, will people who couldn't afford their meds before suddenly rush to get them? Or will the impact be less dramatic?
We'll have to wait and see, but they've dealt with complex regulations before, so I'm not too worried.
Okay, so what about the economy? They mentioned some struggles in the US and China, particularly with aesthetics. How big of a concern is that?
It's definitely a factor, especially for treatments that are considered more elective, like fillers. When money is tight, people might prioritize Botox over those.
Makes sense. So people might be cutting back on fillers before they cut back on Botox if they're feeling the pinch financially.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. But AbbVie seems confident that this is just a temporary dip and that the market will bounce back.
Fingers crossed, right? So even with those potential challenges, they're in a pretty good spot.
Yeah.
What would you say are the key takeaways for our listeners about where AbbVie's headed?
Well, the main thing is that they've successfully moved on from their reliance on Humira. Their diversified portfolio is performing well, and they're investing in future growth.
They're not just resting on their laurels, are they?
Nope. They have a vision, they're willing to be bold, and they have the money to make it happen.
Well, it's been a fascinating glimpse into AbbVie's world today. They might not be the flashiest company, but they're quietly building a healthcare powerhouse.
They're definitely one to watch. They're delivering value for patients and shareholders alike, and it looks like they're just getting started.
Before we wrap up, did anything surprise you during this deep dive? Sometimes these earnings calls reveal unexpected gems.
Honestly, I was really blown away by the sheer size and scope of their drug pipeline. They have so many promising treatments in development across a wide range of therapeutic areas. It's clear they're playing the long game.
Sounds like they've got an army of scientists working tirelessly on the next generation of blockbuster drugs.
You could say that. And it's not just acquisitions. They're investing heavily in their own internal R&D, which is a sign of a company that's truly committed to innovation.
Yeah, not all big pharma companies do that. Some rely heavily on acquisitions for growth, but AbbVie seems to have found a good balance.
A balance that's working well for them.
Okay, one last thing before we move on to our final thoughts for our listeners. Should we touch on one more interesting nugget from this earnings call?
I think it would be beneficial to delve a bit deeper into their approach to M&A. They've been incredibly successful at picking companies that align with their long-term goals.
Okay, let's dissect their M&A strategy. What do they look for when considering a potential acquisition?
First and foremost, they want companies with solid science and strong pipelines in their core areas of focus.
So they're not just chasing the latest trends. They're looking for real substance.
Right. And they're very disciplined. They're not afraid to walk away if the price isn't right, or if they have concerns about the target company's long-term viability.
Smart. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of a big deal, but it's crucial to stay focused on the fundamentals.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the numbers. They also think about the cultural fit. They want companies that share their values and that will mesh well with their existing operations.
It's about building a strong team, right?
Exactly. And their M&A strategy is clearly focused on the long term. They're not looking for quick wins. They're building a foundation for sustainable growth.
So they've developed a winning formula. It'll be interesting to see what companies they go after next.
For sure. Their M&A strategy will definitely play a big role in their future success. They have the resources, the expertise, and the vision to make smart acquisitions that will cement their position as a leader.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground today with AbbVie. As we move into our final thoughts, what's one thing you want our listeners to ponder, building upon what we've discussed?
What I find most intriguing is how AbbVie leverages their expertise in immunology to establish themselves as leaders in other fields.
That's a great point. Tell me more.
They have a profound understanding of the immune system and its role in a wide range of diseases.
It's not just about treating autoimmune diseases. It's about understanding how the immune system can be harnessed to fight things like cancer, neurological disorders, and maybe even aging.
Exactly. They're taking that knowledge and applying it in innovative ways, which gives them a real competitive advantage.
So they're not just an immunology company, they're an immune system company.
Precisely. And that's a powerful position to be in.
All right, listeners, here's something to think about. How will AbbVie's deep understanding of the immune system shape the future of healthcare? It's an exciting question to consider.
It certainly is. They're leading the way, and their discoveries have the potential to change countless lives.
Well, that brings us to the end of this part of our deep dive into AbbVie's Q4 2024 earnings call.
It's been a great conversation.
It has. And we'll be back soon to continue unpacking AbbVie's world and to share a wild trade idea that may or may not involve a spinoff.
Can't wait. Stay tuned, everyone.
See you soon.
It's a fascinating thought, isn't it? Spinning off their aesthetics business. But let's come back down to earth for a moment and dig into some more details from AbbVie's earnings call.
Sounds good. What specifically caught your eye?
Their ability to grow revenue even after losing exclusivity on Humira, that's pretty remarkable.
It is. We're talking about billions of dollars in revenue gone, just like that. And yet, they're not just surviving, they're thriving.
It's a textbook example of why diversification is so important. They knew the Humira patent cliff was coming, and they took steps to prepare for it.
And it looks like those preparations are paying off big time.
Absolutely. And they were very strategic about it, too. They focused on areas where there was a lot of unmet need, like immunology, oncology, and neuroscience.
They went where the patients were and where the innovation was needed.
Right. They're positioning themselves as leaders in those fields.
Which gives them a certain amount of pricing power, right?
Precisely. They're not just competing on price, they're competing on value. They're developing treatments that make a real difference in people's lives.
Treatments that doctors want to prescribe and patients want to take.
Exactly. And they're willing to pay a premium for that.
Just look at Skyrizi and Rinvoq. Those drugs aren't exactly cheap, but they're incredibly effective.
And that's why they're flying off the shelves. But it's not just about the science behind the drugs.
What else is it about?
It's also about their marketing and sales efforts. They've done a fantastic job of educating doctors and patients about the benefits of their products.
They've built strong relationships with physicians. That's key in this industry.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You have to have that trust. And their sales force is top-notch. They really know their stuff.
They're well-trained. They can answer any question a doctor throws at them.
Right. They're not just pushing pills, they're providing valuable information.
It's a winning strategy. But let's shift gears for a moment and talk about those headwinds we discussed earlier, the Medicare Part D redesign and the economic uncertainties in some of their key markets. How do you see those playing out in the coming year?
Well, the Medicare Part D redesign is still a bit of a mystery. It could have a significant impact on AbbVie.
In what way?
It could affect patient access to their medications. Some people might not be able to afford their treatments anymore.
That's a scary thought, especially when it comes to life-saving drugs.
It is. But on the flip side, it could also lead to more people being able to access their medications because some will have lower out-of-pocket costs.
So it's a bit of a double-edged sword.
Exactly. It's hard to predict what the net effect will be. But AbbVie is keeping a close eye on it. They're trying to figure out how to navigate these changes.
And they have a pretty good track record of adapting to challenges.
They do. They're resilient. They've faced obstacles before, and they've always found a way to overcome them.
So we'll have to wait and see how this one plays out. What about the economic uncertainties? They specifically mention headwinds in the U.S. and China, especially in their aesthetics business.
Yeah.
How worried should we be about that?
It's definitely something to keep an eye on, especially for their more expensive treatments like fillers. When the economy is uncertain, people tend to cut back on discretionary spending.
And fillers fall into that category, right?
They do. Botox might be considered more of a necessity, but fillers are definitely more of a luxury.
So people might be more likely to skip their filler appointments than their Botox appointments if they're feeling financially strapped.
Right. But AbbVie seems to think that this is just a temporary blip.
They're betting on the market rebounding once the economy stabilizes.
That's their hope. And they've got reason to be optimistic. The aesthetics market has been growing steadily for years.
It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. People are obsessed with looking young and feeling good.
And that's not going to change anytime soon. So I think AbbVie is probably right. They'll weather this storm.
They're a strong company. They've got the resources and the expertise to navigate these challenges.
I agree. They're not going anywhere.
So to sum things up, what are the key takeaways from this deep dive into AbbVie's earnings call? What should our listeners be paying attention to?
Well, the biggest takeaway is that they've made a successful transition away from Humira. They're no longer dependent on that one blockbuster drug.
That's huge.
Yeah.
It could have been a disaster for them, but they managed it beautifully.
Exactly. They diversified their portfolio, they invested in new treatments, and they came out stronger on the other side.
It's a lesson for all of us, really. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Spread the risk. Invest in your future.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Nah.
So, AbbVie is diversified. They're growing. They're facing challenges head on. What else should we highlight?
I think their commitment to innovation is really impressive. They're not just sitting back and collecting profits. They're constantly looking for ways to improve their treatments, to develop new therapies, to push the boundaries of science.
They're not just a pharmaceutical company, they're a research and development powerhouse.
Exactly. They've got a huge pipeline of promising drugs in development.
And they're not afraid to make bold moves, like acquiring other companies to get access to new technologies and talent.
They're playing the long game. They're building a sustainable business that will be around for decades to come.
Well, it's been fascinating to explore AbbVie's world today. They're a force to be reckoned with in the healthcare industry.
They are. They're making a real difference in people's lives.
Before we wrap up, did anything surprise you as we were doing this deep dive? These earnings calls often reveal unexpected insights.
You know, I was really struck by the sheer breadth and depth of their drug pipeline. The number of promising treatments they have in development across so many different areas is astonishing. They're clearly in it for the long haul.
It's like they have an army of scientists working tirelessly to discover the next generation of blockbuster drugs.
You could say that. And what's really impressive is that they're not just relying on acquisitions. They're investing heavily in internal research and development, too. That shows a real commitment to innovation.
Not all big pharmaceutical companies are willing to do that. Some are heavily reliant on acquisitions for growth, but AbbVie seems to have found the right balance.
And it's a balance that's clearly working for them.
All right, one last thing before we move on to our final thoughts. Should we squeeze in one more interesting tidbit from this earnings call?
I think it would be worthwhile to examine their approach to mergers and acquisitions in a bit more detail. They've been incredibly successful at identifying and acquiring companies that perfectly complement their long-term goals.
Okay, let's break down their M&A strategy. What are the key things they consider when evaluating a potential acquisition?
First and foremost, they look for companies with solid scientific foundations and promising drug pipelines in their core areas of focus immunology, oncology, neuroscience, and aesthetics.
So they're not just jumping on the latest biotech bandwagon, they're looking for real substance.
Exactly. They're also incredibly disciplined in their approach. They're not afraid to walk away from a deal if the price isn't right or if they have doubts about the company's long-term viability.
Smart move. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of a potential acquisition, but you have to keep your eye on the ball.
For sure. And it's not just about the numbers either. They think carefully about the cultural fit too. They want to acquire companies that share their values and that will integrate seamlessly with their existing operations.
It's about building a strong team that can work together effectively towards a shared vision.
Right. And their acquisition strategy is definitely focused on the long term. They're not interested in quick wins. They're building a foundation for lasting success.
So they've figured out a winning formula. It'll be fun to see what companies they target next.
Absolutely. Their M&A strategy will definitely play a big role in their continued success. They have the resources, the expertise, and the vision to make savvy acquisitions that will solidify their position as a leader in the industry.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground with AbbVie today. As we move into our final thoughts, what's one thing you want our listeners to ponder, something that builds on what we've discussed?
I find it fascinating how AbbVie has leveraged their deep understanding of the immune system to establish themselves as a leader, not just in immunology, but also in other therapeutic areas.
That's an interesting point. I hadn't really thought about it that way before. Tell me more.
They have a truly impressive grasp of the complexities of the immune system and how it plays a role in a wide array of diseases.
So it's not just about treating autoimmune conditions like rheumatoid arthritis and Crohn's disease. It's about understanding how the immune system can be harnessed to combat things like cancer and neurological disorders.
Exactly. They're applying that knowledge in innovative ways to develop new treatments for a wide range of conditions, which gives them a significant edge over their competitors.
So they're not just an immunology company, they're an immune system company.
Exactly. They're looking at the bigger picture, and that's a powerful position to be in.
Okay, listeners, here's something to think about. How will AbbVie's deep understanding of the immune system shape the future of healthcare? It's a question worth pondering.
It is. They're leading the way in this area, and their discoveries have the potential to transform the lives of millions of people around the world.
Well, that brings us to the end of this part of our deep dive into AbbVie's Q4 2024 earnings call. We've covered a lot of ground, but hopefully we've given you a good overview of their recent performance, their strategic direction, and their vision for the future.
We've talked about their impressive financial results, their blockbuster immunology drugs, Skyrizi and Rinvoq, their expansion into other therapeutic areas like neuroscience, oncology, and aesthetics, their strategic acquisitions, and their unwavering commitment to innovation. And of course, we can't forget that spin-off idea we tossed around. Who knows, maybe someday we'll be analyzing AbbVie Aesthetics as a standalone company. Stranger things have happened. But let's be real, AbbVie's a company that's worth keeping on your radar. They're doing incredible work, and their track record speaks for itself.
Couldn't agree more. So, listeners, keep an eye on AbbVie. They're making a real difference, and they're just getting started.
And a friendly reminder, as always, this is not financial advice. Do your own research. Talk to a financial professional before making any investment decisions.
Absolutely. We're here to share insights and get you thinking, but the decisions are ultimately yours.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into AbbVie. We'll be back next week with another fascinating look at a company that's shaping the future.
Until then, stay curious and keep learning.